What's going on, Bengals fans? Stone Shields on hand for another edition of Bengals Breakdown. And coming up on today's show, we're going to be breaking down 32 potential free agent targets for the Cincinnati Bengals on the offensive side of the football. Going to be going through the offensive line, receiver, running back, tight end as well. Not going to be doing any quarterbacks. I think that position is taken care of. But that's what's coming up here on today's show. Now, if you want defensive free agent targets, show it to us by liking today's video for me right now, going for at least 400 likes here on today's show. So help me out, hit that thumbs up icon, something you should do for all of our videos here at Bengals Breakdown. All right, obviously the offensive line is an area that needs to improve. I think you have some promise there at your tackles, and I think you have a lot of faith in your center, Ted Karras, but the guards in particular need to get better. I would like Cincinnati to be able to move on and find new starters at the left guard spot and the right guard spot. First guy we're going to be talking about here is Will Hernandez of the Arizona Cardinals. Now, he comes with a massive red flag. He missed the majority of the season with a torn ACL, so he really has a tough road ahead of him, no doubt. Didn't play much in 2024, but certainly a guy people view as a really solid guard in the National Football League. Mekhi Becton next up on our list here. We spent some time in the past talking about Mekhi Becton. He really kind of rejuvenated his career here in Philadelphia, getting to work with a guy like Jeff Stoutland and really impacted their Super Bowl team. He bumped into that guard spot. I think he's going to garner a lot of money in free agency. Probably not something Cincinnati is going to want to pay at this point. James Daniels, another guy that we've talked about here before on Bengals Breakdown. He, too, has a massive red flag coming off of a serious injury with that Achilles. Most recently played with the Pittsburgh Steelers for a couple of years. I think he's certainly a guy that you could potentially target because he's going to be very, very cheap coming off that injury. Maybe even kind of a vet min type of contract, but certainly some interest in James Daniels, and a lot of people out there in the media have connected Cincinnati and James Daniels. Another Arizona Cardinals offensive lineman, Evan Brown. Certainly a guy that could come in and potentially make an impact for your football team as well. And this last interior offensive lineman on this list is Liam Eichenberg. He's kind of an interesting player to me. Eichenberg's a guy that I think kind of fits a similar role to Cody Ford. And Cincinnati, of course, has a decision to make with Cody Ford. I think some people around the team hope that he is back. I personally would rather move off a guy like Cody Ford, but he kind of reminds me of Ford in a lot of ways. He can kind of do whatever. He can play all those positions along the offensive line and really do a nice job of stepping up if somebody gets hurt. But if he's a guy you're going to on a down-to-down basis, that's probably not a good situation. And I think you saw his play drop with the Dolphins when he was out there a little bit more than he should have been. Leads us to the pinned comment of today's video. How many players do the Bengals sign in free agency total? How many do you think Duke Tobin, Zach Taylor, and company will bring in? Let me know in the comment section. Give me a number. If that ad comes here on YouTube, that's totally fine. Take advantage of it. Get down in the comments. Let us know what you think. All right, let's spend some time here talking about the wide receivers as well. Of course, the main conversation point around the Bengals wide receivers at this point is bringing back T. Higgins. But I think there really is a world where Cincinnati could also bring in a wide receiver via free agency. So let's break down some names here on today's show. First up here is Stefon Diggs. Stefon Diggs is not going to be coming to the Cincinnati Bengals. He was the guy that really at one point was an elite wide receiver in this league. Kind of has fallen off, certainly has had injury concerns over the past few years. He is kind of a diva in my book, and he's just not really a guy that I am looking to come bring into this football team. Don't think he necessarily would do a good job of complementing Jamar Chase, and hopefully T. Higgins is back as well. I'm passing on Stefon Diggs. Next up here is DeAndre Hopkins, who I believe is going to retire from the National Football League, but we threw him here on this list just in case he does decide to have a change of heart. Hopkins, of course, at one point was one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League, but he kind of aged pretty quickly, had that massive drop in the Super Bowl. I think a lot of people will remember. It seems like he is done, but I certainly think a team could find a role for him kind of at that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 spot if he were to change his mind and come back. Next up here is Amari Cooper. I really love Amari Cooper. I've always loved Amari Cooper, dating back to when he was a member of the Alabama Crimson Tide. He certainly has gotten up there a little bit in age, and he isn't the player necessarily he once was. Potential that Cincinnati could land a guy like Amari Cooper, but probably would get a couple of more dollars than what Cincinnati is trying to spend. Marquise Hollywood Brown next up here on this list. Of course, played with Kansas City this past year. Certainly some injury concerns as well. When you're talking about Hollywood out there at the wide receiver position, I think Kansas City certainly had higher expectations than what they got from Hollywood Brown this past year, and he's a guy that I, too, am also kind of just staying away from at this point. I'm looking for more of a veteran, mature guy to come in, not to, knock Hollywood in any sense of the term, but I think not really the fit that Cincinnati is looking for at that receiver spot. This next guy, though, perhaps could be Darius Slayton, who's a guy that is just a true professional when you talk about him out there on the football field. I believe he's been with the Giants for 6 years. The Giants have continuously brought in new receivers, drafted new guys, right? And he just happens to stick around as that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 kind of spot, and on some good days, wide receiver 2 as well. And Darius Slayton, a veteran guy, I think that's what this team could use. Especially kind of, bringing in Jermaine Burton in last year's draft. That kind of blew up in your face. It'd be nice to get an older guy in here with some experience that could really be a leader in that room. And I think Darius Slayton certainly fits that bill. Another opportunity for you guys to get involved with our show. Here at Bengals Breakdown, should Cincinnati add another wide receiver? Either via the draft or free agency, or are you just trying to bring back T. Higgins and run it back with that same exact room? Let me know in the comments section. Type Y for yes or N for no. Next up here is Elijah Moore of the Browns. And when he came out of Ole Miss several years ago, I was really high on him. But then he went to New York, right? And they kind of had, a dumpster fire of a situation there. In Cleveland, it really wasn't much better. He has a lot of speed, but I think he's probably going to get too much money for what Cincinnati would want to pay because this wide receiver free agent class isn't very deep when you're talking about really Chris Godwin leading that charge, of course, assuming Cincinnati is able to come to terms with T. Higgins. But I think Elijah Moore probably someone that Cincinnati is not going to be able to get. Noah Brown, have a little bit of interest in him, no doubt. I think Bengals fans remember a couple of years ago when he was a member of the Houston Texans and he absolutely torched the Cincinnati Bengals. He probably still running wide open in Paycor Stadium right now. Noah Brown's a guy, an Ohio State Buckeye, of course. I would like to bring him in potentially as a wide receiver 3. I don't hate that whatsoever. Noah Brown certainly could potentially have a future in Cincinnati with Joe Burrow. Zay Jones next here on this list. I think he played his best ball in Jacksonville. I feel like he kind of took a step back with the Arizona Cardinals here recently. Probably not a likely signing for Cincinnati. Robert Woods next up here on this list. I kind of compare Robert Woods a little bit to kind of like a Noah Brown or a Darius Slayton on this list. When you're talking about guys that I would bring in, I certainly have interest in Robert Woods. There was a point when he was with the Rams where he was an elite wide receiver in this league. Kind of has bounced around a little bit. Remember, he got cut by the Titans, I believe, and then most recently has played with the Houston Texans. But he's a veteran guy. I think this team could use a veteran presence in that wide receiver room. Mack Hollins, he certainly is kind of a, he's not shy, certainly. When you're talking about a guy like Mack Hollins, I think Josh Allen really brought the best out of Mack Hollins, and I think Joe Burrow could do the same, but I don't really see him as a great fit out there with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I am passing on Mack Hollins personally. Now remember, we are in a like battle with our Ravens channel here at Chat Sports. So far, so good through the month of February, but keep helping us out. Keep hitting that thumbs up icon. We have blown this at the end of the month before. Not trying to have that happen here again. Hit that thumbs up icon for me right now. Talk running backs here on today's show. The Bengals, of course, have their RB1 of the future, Chase Brown. They knocked that pick out of the park a couple of years ago, but the rest of the room certainly is a concern at this point. I shouldn't say necessarily a concern, but a lot of uncertainty at this point. So let's break down some potential running backs here on this list. Aaron Jones, first up here. I think Aaron Jones still has the ability to be a 1 in this league. I think he had a great season last year in Minnesota, and of course had a great career in Green Bay prior to that. I'm expecting Aaron Jones to get a lot of money and have a role as an RB1 in this league going forward. Probably not going to happen in terms of signing Aaron Jones. Next up here, Najee Harris. He doesn't appear to be the runner that he once was, right? He took so much punishment at Alabama and took so much punishment throughout the first couple of years in Pittsburgh. And, running backs tend to age quickly. Depending on the price, I would be interested to have him come in and be a backup guy. I love the way he plays. I love his mindset. I think he would be great in the locker room. So he's certainly a guy that I would consider. But is Cincinnati really going to want to bring in a guy that spent the first several years in Pittsburgh? They did it with Mike Hilton. Maybe they do it again with Najee Harris. J.K. Dobbins, for a while, it looked like he was going to be done, right? Just serious injury after serious injury. But what's he do? He comes back and plays really the best year of his career under Jim Harbaugh out there in Los Angeles. Dobbins, of course, an Ohio State Buckeye. I'm sure he would be interested in coming back to the state of Ohio and playing football. If I'm the Chargers, I would probably have interest in trying to bring back J.K. Dobbins based on the season he just had. A.J. Dillon here for the Green Bay Packers, another guy that has really carved himself out a nice year in this, nice career in this league. Obviously, did not play last year in 2024 with the Green Bay Packers, but prior to that, really complimented Aaron Jones really well. Obviously, the year off is a bit concerning. And I don't know. I think he definitely could be kind of a third down back for Cincinnati, which obviously is a position that they are kind of looking for. Nick Chubb, next up here on this list. Nick Chubb, of course, came back from a serious injury this past year. Only played 8 games, only 2 prior to that in 2023. We'll see. I think Nick Chubb can really get back to true peak Nick Chubb form, but it's not going to be here in Cincinnati. Javonte Williams, next up on this list. He certainly might be looking for a new home. He kind of got phased out with what they were doing on the run game in Denver. Sean Payton had some other backs that he was going to a little bit more. Certainly some interest in Javonte Williams. Next up here, Raheem Mostert, who is getting up there in age. I believe Raheem Mostert's like 32 years old, and I had not realized he was that old. But Miami is going to part ways with him. Achane's going to be kind of their main guy. Mostert's going to be looking for a new home. I would be surprised if it ended in Cincinnati, but I certainly think he will be a backup for the rest of his career. Last guy here on this list from the running backs, Alexander Mattison. Most recently played with the Las Vegas Raiders. He, too, is kind of a guy that has spent a lot of time in this league and is probably looking just to be a part of a committee and could be a potential backup option for Cincinnati at that running back spot. We went through 8 guys there on that list, but I probably would say Cincinnati would lean more towards just drafting another guy to enter that running back room. For more Bengals free agency coverage, you know what to do. Hit that sub button. We will be here all offseason long covering the entirety of the Cincinnati Bengals offseason. Don't miss out. Hit that sub button, youtube.com/BengalsTV. 4 tight ends here that we will talk about. Of course, we got to talk about George Kittle right now. Kittle did say that he wants to stay in San Francisco, but I think George Kittle in this Cincinnati offense, boy, would that be a lot of fun. Obviously, Cincinnati trying to bring back Mike Gesicki. I think Kittle's obviously a completely, totally different tight end than Mike Gesicki, certainly more of a blocker at that tight end spot. George Kittle still has some good years ahead of him in the National Football League. I would love to land George Kittle, but again, I think he wants to stay in San Francisco, and I think ownership in San Francisco will make sure that happens. Austin Hooper most recently played with the New England Patriots. He's a guy that he had some really good years, I believe, back in Atlanta. And really has bounced around ever since that. Still has some good stuff to offer, but not much interest for me in terms of Austin Hooper. Dalton Schultz, next guy up here on this list. Schultz, of course, played with Dallas. Past couple of seasons played with the Houston Texans. And kind of had not as great of a year this past year in 2024 as 2023. But again, I think your priority for Cincinnati is keeping on to Mike Gesicki. And adding someone like this would probably be a last resort type of situation. Evan Ingram really was kind of the best pass catcher, and I think before they got Brian Thomas Jr. in here, probably the favorite target of Trevor Lawrence. He's a guy that really is a solid receiver a solid tight end in the National Football League. He can do a lot. You could use a big guy like that could block, especially with Eric All Jr.'s injury, but I would consider it a long shot for Cincinnati to land Evan Ingram. Before we get out of here, let's talk some offensive tackles. Now, I think Cincinnati has their starters in Orlando Brown Jr. and Amari Mims at that offensive tackle spot, but Tyron Smith is a guy, veteran guy, has been around the block, and he had a decent year in 2024, and you could certainly bring him in. I think he's looking to be a starter in this league, and I think when you're looking at the tackle spot, you're probably trying to just bring in a backup at this point. Jedrick Wills, another guy from Alabama coming off a injury that he suffered this past season with the Cleveland Browns. He to me is a starter, a guy that you bring in to be a starter, and I don't think that's what Cincinnati is looking for in their tackles. Kelvin Beachum, certainly another guy for the Arizona Cardinals. They got to kind of revamp their entirety of their offensive line, along with Jackson Barton. We've got him on this list as well. We've talked about basically their entire offensive line, so certainly some decisions in Arizona that need to be made in regards to that. And last up here, Patrick Mekhi of the Baltimore Ravens. I think he's a really, really tough player. love guys that play in the AFC North, right? You bring them in here, they understand what it's like to play in the AFC North. I think Patrick Mekhi certainly could boost you at that tackle spot. But again, I think you got your starters there in Mims and Orlando Brown Jr. You're just looking for a little bit of backup along those two positions of the offensive line at this point.